What's up guys, welcome to this review of Marvel's What If Season 1. This is an anthology series of animated episodes set in the Marvel Cinematic Universe multiverse. It is canonical, it is part of the MCU, but it's just in alternate galaxies or universes featuring characters we all know and love, just not quite how we expect to see them. Some of the stories here are pretty cool and interesting with unique concepts and ideas, some of them not so much. So overall, what did I think of Marvel's What If? I was really disappointed by this. I don't think it's good. I barely think it's okay. And like I said, I think some of them are cool and interesting, others really not, and most of them are somewhere in the middle. So the problem is that this is part of the MCU, it is canonical, but why? A lot of these stories are standalone episodes. They are. One episode's with zombies, one episode's about a party, one episode's about something else. It's not until like the final two episodes that there actually is like a clear narrative arc forming. And those two episodes at the final are the best of the whole season in my opinion, because of that. There is an overarching narrator and character in The Watcher. He's pretty cool and interesting, but we don't get too much of him until the end of the series. So why should I care about any of these standalone episodes when these are alternate versions of characters who I've known and loved for a few years now, but they're so throwaway? These aren't in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that I know. These aren't in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that we've watched over 20 plus films. So these aren't the characters we know and love. Why should we care about what happens to them? And these storylines are so different and unique and interesting that it's like, right, this can't possibly be relevant to what's going on in the main cinematic universe, so why should I care? And it's also the fact that a lot of these stories are like setting up for bigger stories and bigger events, so they often end on a bit of a cliffhanger. They often end with an openness to them where there is very clearly going to be some sort of sequel or follow-up possibly in season 2. So again, why should I care? That's the big issue with this series as a whole, is that so much of it just doesn't seem important. It doesn't seem to matter. I think it actually would have been better if this wasn't part of the MCU, because that way it would be like, right, we can really have fun with this. Nothing here matters, it's just fun, it's exciting, it's interesting. But the fact that it is part of the MCU means that there has to be a greater importance here, and I just can't see it. Not until the final two episodes at least, but even then it's like, this seems to be happening in the distance. It doesn't seem to be impacting what we know from the MCU so far. So let's get into what some of the stories are. You've got some of them where they are going in radical different ideas and directions with these characters. But then you've got some where it's like, right, what if this one scene in this one film was slightly different? What if this character took on that role? And then you just see the film play out, but with this character instead. Those were a little disappointing and not as fun. So the Agent Carter one at the first one, or Captain Carter as she ends up being, that's basically just the first Captain America movie, but where Agent Carter's the main character. That's not super interesting. Then you've got a Doctor Strange one where things play out a little differently again, right? You're kind of playing out with the whole plot of Doctor Strange movie, but then going in a different direction towards the end. It's like half of it is interesting, half of it not so much. So I like the ones that really just pulled away from what we already know and what's already established in the MCU, rather than the ones that just played around a little with changing characters and so on and so forth. And in relation to the fact that a lot of these feel like they're just establishing stories and establishing characters with openness to them, at the same time these episodes are about 25 minutes long, some of them are about half an hour. They all feel a bit rushed at the same time. It feels like they are feature-length movie ideas crammed into a 25-minute episode. So a lot of the comedic elements, a lot of the jokes in this feel really fast-paced, really quick. It feels like this is a show geared towards the younger Marvel Cinematic Universe audience, and that's cool. It's fine to address that audience. But at the same time, some of the ideas are really dark and twisted as well. So it's like, are you actually targeting this younger audience? If so, it makes sense why everything's a bit quicker and a bit zippier and a bit more silly in terms of the comedy and so on. But there are certain themes and stories that just don't quite vibe with that. So the tone's a bit off here and there, and the themes are a bit off here and there in terms of who the audience actually is. And because of that, comedy's kind of all over the place as well. Some of the comedy, the It's just too quick. The jokes don't have time to breathe. The landing doesn't have room to land, and a lot of the comedy just doesn't really work. Some of it does, but not all of it. And it doesn't always feel like MCU comedy. It doesn't feel like it's natural. It doesn't feel like it's in the moment. It feels like it is scripted. It feels like it is just coming out being trying to be like stand-up comedians at times, and it's weird. Now, luckily, the action scenes in this, because it is a superhero TV show, it is in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the action scenes are pretty good. There's a lot of thrilling action scenes in there. There's stuff with Captain Carter in the first episode where she's flying through the air. That's all really cool and well realized. There's stuff in the last 2 episodes involving certain characters I'm not going to name where it really is cool. And then there's Miss Marvel versus Thor in one of the episodes. Again, really cool visual stuff going on there. Really cool action. So that does elevate some of the stuff going on in that it adds some thrills and excitement to things. But let's talk about some of the characters, because this is one of the most impressive elements of this TV show, but also one of the most disappointing elements as well. The characters are, I would say 95% of the characters in this show are voiced by the actors who played them in the live action movies. That's really impressive and incredible. Clearly though, some of them are better at voice acting than others. And I'm not going to name names, but the likes of Jeremy Renner, Lake Bell, who's standing in for Scarlett Johansson, those are brilliant. Those are really nailing their roles. Haley Atwell as well. But then there are some others out there who like, oof, were you getting any direction at all, or were you literally just reading from the script? So yeah, the voice acting's kind of all over the place in that regard. But for the most part, it works pretty well. I do think there's an adherence a little too much to the established characters in the MCU. We are seeing alternate galaxies here, but we're only seeing the characters we actually already know. There's no X-Men here. There's no new Marvel Cinematic Universe characters except for the Watcher. There's a little bit more of some minor characters like Howard the Duck we see a bit more of, but overall it's like it's so reliant on the characters we know that it feels like a little disappointing that in all these alternate galaxies and universes that there aren't characters like the Fantastic Four popping up there, there aren't characters like the X-Men popping up here and there. So it's just a bit weird how these, even in these alternate galaxies, these groups of people and characters just aren't there or being referenced. And while these are alternate universe takes on these characters, a lot of them are still kind of similar to the characters we know. Black Panther, for example. In all these alternate universes, the one that really stood out is Black Panther, in that he becomes Star-Lord. But at the end of the day, he's still just Black Panther, just without the costume. So a little disappointing there. And then other characters like Thor, there's Party Thor. It's like, right, we've kind of seen this version of Thor already in Thor Ragnarok. You're just heightening it up a bit here. And then there's Doctor Strange. We see a darker side of Doctor Strange, but again, these elements, we've seen little hints of these elements already. So they're not doing anything wild or unbelievable with a lot of these characters. There are some exceptions out there. They go in a new direction with like Ultron, for example, and Captain Carter gets a lot more attention. But for the most part, these are still the characters we know and love, just very slightly different. So that's a bit disappointing that they weren't trying to push them in more radical ways and direction. But in terms of the voice actors, as I said, 95% of them are from the films. Cool. Which means 5% of them aren't. Lake Bell, for example, I brought in as the replacement of Scarlett Johansson. I think she's brilliant. She actually does a really good Scarlett Johansson voice. She's a good voice actor. She does a good job as Black Widow in here. But then you've got Ross Marquand coming in, standing in for Ultron. Not quite so good. He's trying to do a James Spader impression, but let's face it, James Spader has a very unique voice and you can't duplicate that. So the final few episodes where Ultron is a significant character, every time he spoke he was just a little off. It kind of took me out of it a bit. It also didn't have that. Ultron in this version is in the body of Vision, so it's like, oh, that's not Paul Bettany. I get why. I get that it should be Ultron's voice, but there's a huge distance between the fact that it's not James Spader, it's not Paul Bettany, and it's not quite the Ultron we know. So that was weird. But then there are other ones like Captain America and Tony Stark where the voice impressions are actually quite good. So let's talk about the production, the look of the show, the design of the show. This is where I've got really, I'm tempted to say mixed views on this, but there's actually a bit more negative if I'm honest. I do not like the art design of the show at all. I don't like the look of the characters, I don't like the look of the environments. I think it's somewhere between being like 2D animation and CGI, and it can't quite make up its mind. I think there's a lot of colour in here. Sometimes the show does look good, it does look gorgeous when it's introducing cool lighting effects and so on, but overall I just don't like the look of the show. This art style does not vibe with me at all. I understand if it does with you. Art and so on is very subjective. What someone likes doesn't mean everyone's gonna like. I personally don't like this. I understand why some people might. And in relation to this, the animation, I think the animation for a Marvel produced TV show, I think the animation is not good either, for the most part. Some of the action scenes are cool, yeah, that's great, but everything else, like the lip sync for example, is so off. Why is the lip sync so bad? Either the animation was done separate to the voice acting, or the voice actors didn't see the animation and they couldn't sync it up. Something is off there. The way the show was made is off. Maybe it was because of the pandemic, maybe it was because they couldn't produce things all in sync with each other, and that's why. But either way, the fact that the lip sync is so bad is key that something is wrong. And I do think it actually got better throughout the series, but particularly in the first episode, Captain Carter's episode, the lip sync is just very distracting. But also the animation I think is very basic. Again, the action scenes are the highlight in terms of the animation, but everything else, not so much. When they are doing a bit more CGI, when they are doing a bit more fast-paced, exciting stuff, whether it's action or not, whether it is just like a montage or a big sequence of events, that's when the animation really shines. But everything else, a little basic, nothing to really talk about. And the soundtrack and score is good. There are some good spins on the classic Marvel Cinematic Universe soundtrack and score in there, but it kind of blends into the background, so you know, that's kind of a good thing. It doesn't distract away from it too much, but nothing really stands out at the same time. So ultimately, Marvel's What If, I found it to be very disappointing. There are some episodes in there, particularly in the back end, which I liked, and there are some cool ideas in there, but overall, I was disappointed. As part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this doesn't feel important, it doesn't feel relevant, and that's the biggest disappointment. In that everything in Marvel seems like it's going to come together at some point or another. I'm finding it hard to believe that this is actually going to come together at some point and be part of like the live action franchise at all. So that's got me worried. We are getting a second season, maybe they can address that a bit more. Maybe we will see some more live action elements in here. Maybe we'll see characters from the live action movies come into this. Who knows? There's a lot of possibilities in the future, and that is exciting. But as of right now, got very mixed feelings about this show. If you've liked this review, why not subscribe to my channel to get more content like this, and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @the_Graham. Until next time though, that's all I've got to talk about in Marvel's What If. Until next time, thanks for watching.